Have you ever stayed in a relationship not because you felt deeply in love, but because you were afraid of breaking your family apart? In this real English story from my life in the United States, I share how culture shock, learning English, marriage stress, and raising children in America pushed us to the edge, and how one honest question changed everything. When silence got loud. Silence can be louder than shouting, especially when you are sitting across from the person you once loved deeply and realizing you do not know what to say anymore. That was the beginning of our hardest season in the United States. When we first arrived in America, I believed our biggest challenge would be learning English. I thought if we improved our English listening skills, practiced speaking every day, and worked hard, our marriage would naturally stay strong. After all, we had survived so much already. Moving to a new country felt like a shared dream. A shared mission. But immigration stress does not knock loudly. It creeps in quietly. We rented a small apartment during our first year. The walls were thin. The heater clicked all night during winter. Outside, everything felt unfamiliar, different culture, different system, different pace of life. Inside our home, something else slowly changed. Our conversations became shorter. At first, it seemed normal. We were busy. Long work hours. English communication at work required intense focus. When you operate all day in a second language, your brain becomes tired in a special way. Not sleepy tired. Emotionally drained tired. Research in cognitive psychology shows that processing a second language uses more mental energy than your native language. That constant effort reduces emotional patience. It makes you more sensitive. Less flexible. Small misunderstandings feel larger than they really are. And marriage needs patience. One night, we sat at the kitchen table after putting the kids to bed. The room was quiet except for the refrigerator humming. I noticed something uncomfortable. We had not laughed together in weeks. Not a real laugh. Just polite smiles. Our conversations sounded like business meetings. Did you pay the electricity bill? What time is your shift tomorrow? Did you check our son's homework? Important topics. Necessary topics. But not intimate topics. We were surviving together, not connecting together. To improve faster, we had decided to speak more English at home. It sounded like a smart strategy. After all, this was America. English fluency meant opportunity. Confidence. Growth. Instead, it created distance. When I made grammar mistakes, I felt embarrassed. When she corrected my pronunciation, I felt judged, even if she did not mean to judge me. When she spoke more confidently, I compared myself. When I improved faster in certain situations, she became quiet. A silent competition entered our marriage. Who adapts better? Who sounds more American? Who feels less foreign? These questions were never spoken out loud. But they lived between us like invisible walls. One evening, I looked at her and said, slowly, in English, "Are you okay?" She paused before answering. "I'm tired," she said. Not angry. Not blaming. Just tired. There is something important I learned during that season, especially if you are using this story for English listening practice right now. Exhaustion can feel like the end of love. But exhaustion and lack of love are not the same thing. When you are tired, mentally, emotionally, physically, your brain looks for relief. Relief sometimes looks like distance. It looks like silence. It looks like avoiding difficult conversations. Psychologists call this emotional withdrawal. It is common in couples under high stress, especially immigrant couples adjusting to a new culture in the United States. We were in survival mode. Survival mode focuses on paying rent, improving English, protecting children, keeping jobs, understanding American systems. It does not focus on romance. It does not focus on emotional connection. And when survival mode lasts too long, intimacy slowly fades. One Saturday afternoon, our son asked something simple. "Why don't you and Mom talk like before?" Children sense tension even when you think you are hiding it. Studies in family psychology show that children are highly sensitive to emotional tone. Even if parents do not argue loudly, emotional distance creates insecurity. His question stayed in my mind. We told ourselves we were staying strong for the kids. We told ourselves we were united for their future in America. We said this often. But another thought began growing inside me. Are we staying together because we love each other, or because we are afraid to start over? Fear is powerful. Fear of divorce. Fear of financial instability. Fear of being alone in a foreign country. Fear of failing in front of our children. Fear of admitting that the American dream feels heavier than expected. That evening, I went outside alone. The air was cold. The street was quiet. I thought about our early years of marriage before immigration. We had less money then. Less pressure. But more laughter. So what changed? The country changed. The language changed. The pressure changed us. In America, everything moves fast. Conversations move fast. Work expectations move fast. If you are not careful, your emotional connection gets left behind. Silence is not always peaceful. Sometimes silence is postponed truth. When I came back home, she was sitting on the couch. The television was on, but she was not watching it. I sat beside her. The quiet felt heavy. Then I said the question I had been afraid to say. Are we staying together because we want to, or because we are scared? Her eyes filled with tears. Not dramatic tears. Quiet tears. I don't know, she whispered. That simple sentence changed something. Not because it solved our problems, but because it was honest. Honest communication, even in simple English, creates connection. You do not need advanced vocabulary to express truth. You need courage. That night, we did not fix our marriage. But we stopped pretending everything was fine. Pretending uses more energy than arguing. And we were too tired to pretend anymore. The real issue was no longer just learning English or adjusting to American culture. The real issue was whether we could face our fear and still choose love consciously. Because staying together for the kids might protect a family on the outside. But only real connection can protect it from the inside. Our first winter in America. Winter in America does not politely introduce itself. It arrives with sharp wind, gray skies, and a kind of cold that feels personal. Our first winter in the United States was more than weather. It was culture shock. It was isolation. It was the season when our marriage felt the pressure of immigration in a way we never expected. Back in our home country, winter was mild. Life happened outside. Neighbors talked loudly. Family visited without invitation. There was noise, warmth, connection. In America, during that first winter, the streets were quiet. Doors stayed closed. People smiled politely but kept distance. Even small talk felt formal. For immigrants adjusting to life in the United States, winter can intensify loneliness. Studies show that cold climates and shorter daylight hours increase feelings of isolation, especially for people already experiencing cultural transition. Less sunlight affects mood. Less social interaction affects emotional stability. We did not know this at the time. We only felt it. I remember standing at a bus stop at 6 a.m., waiting to go to work. The sky was still dark. I was practicing English sentences in my head. Good morning. How are you? Yes, I understand. Simple phrases. But my heart beat fast every time I had to use them. Language anxiety is real. Researchers call it foreign language anxiety. It can cause sweating, increased heart rate, and avoidance behavior. When you are afraid of making mistakes in English, your body reacts as if you are in danger. Imagine carrying that stress all day. Now imagine coming home to your spouse who is carrying the same invisible weight. Our apartment felt smaller during winter. The windows stayed closed. The heater ran constantly. The air felt dry. We started spending more time on our phones. Scrolling. Watching videos. Escaping. Not because we did not love each other, but because screens require less emotional effort than conversation. One evening, after dinner, she said something that stayed with me. I miss who we were before America. She did not mean she hated America. She meant she missed the lighter version of us. Culture shock has stages. At first, everything feels exciting. New food. New system. New opportunity. Then comes frustration. Confusion. Doubt. This is called the adjustment dip. Many immigrants experience it between 6 months and 2 years after arrival. We were deep in that dip. Simple tasks felt complicated. Health insurance forms. School paperwork. Tax documents. Everything was in English. Everything required attention. At night, instead of talking about dreams, we talked about survival. Did you understand the email from school? What did your manager say? Are we saving enough? Romantic conversations disappeared. And here is something subtle but important for anyone learning English through this story. When you are constantly operating in a second language, you may lose some emotional expression. It is harder to describe complex feelings in simple English. Instead of saying, "I feel disconnected and overwhelmed," you might just say, "I'm tired." That word, tired, became our emotional shortcut. But tired covered many emotions. Lonely, afraid, homesick, insecure. Our children adapted faster. They learned American pronunciation quickly. They understood jokes at school. They made friends. We were proud. But we were also quietly jealous. They seemed to belong faster than we did. One snowy afternoon, I slipped on ice outside our apartment building. Nothing serious. Just embarrassment. A neighbor saw me and asked, "You good?" I smiled and said, "Yes, I'm fine." But inside, I felt small. It was not about the fall. It was about feeling unsteady in every part of life. Language, career, marriage. That night, she and I argued about something small. I do not even remember what. Maybe dishes. Maybe money. But small arguments during high stress are rarely about the real issue. Psychology explains this as displacement. When you cannot control big stressors, like immigration pressure, you focus on small controllable frustrations. So we argued about dishes. But underneath, we were afraid. Afraid that we were changing. Afraid that America was changing us in ways we did not understand. Afraid that staying together was becoming a responsibility instead of a choice. Later, while the children slept, we sat quietly again. The heater clicked. The apartment felt still. She said softly, "Do you think we would be happier if we never moved?" That question was dangerous. Not because it meant regret, but because it opened a door to comparison. Comparison is powerful. Especially when you are building a new life in America and everything feels slower than expected. I thought carefully before answering. If we never moved, I said slowly, we might feel comfortable. But maybe we would always wonder, what if? That is the paradox of immigration. Stay, and you wonder about opportunity. Leave, and you wonder about stability. There is no perfect choice. Only chosen sacrifice. Our first winter forced us to see something clearly. The problem was not America. The problem was not English. The problem was not even stress. The problem was that we stopped protecting our connection. We treated our marriage like something that would survive automatically. But relationships in a new country require intentional care. Winter outside was cold. But winter inside the relationship was colder. And cold, if ignored long enough, freezes movement. We were not frozen yet. But we were close. That season taught me something important about immigrant life in the United States and about love under pressure. Climate changes your mood. Culture changes your habits. But silence changes your relationship. The question was no longer whether winter would pass. The question was whether we would thaw with it. English between us. Language is supposed to connect people. Words are bridges. Sentences are invitations. But in our second year in the United States, English slowly became a wall inside our marriage. At first, we were excited to practice together. We downloaded English listening apps. We watched American TV shows with subtitles. We repeated simple phrases out loud. Good morning. I appreciate your help. I understand what you mean. We treated it like teamwork. But somewhere along the way, improvement turned into comparison. In America, language equals confidence. The better you speak English, the more independent you feel. The more independent you feel, the less you need help. And sometimes, without realizing it, independence can create emotional distance. She started improving quickly at work. Her pronunciation became smoother. She understood jokes her coworkers made. She began telling me stories about conversations she had during lunch breaks. I smiled and said I was proud. And I was. But there was another emotion hiding underneath pride. Insecurity. My job required less speaking. I listened more than I talked. I nodded often. I kept my sentences short. I avoided situations where I might make grammar mistakes. Linguists describe something called language identity. When you speak a second language, you may feel like a different version of yourself. Less expressive. Less funny. Less intelligent. That was happening to me. In my native language, I could tell stories with emotion. I could argue confidently. I could joke. In English, I felt reduced to simple sentences. I agree. That's okay. No problem. Over time, those short phrases followed me home. Our conversations became simpler. Not because our thoughts were simple, but because English limited how we expressed them. One evening, we argued about something small again. I tried to explain how I felt, but the words would not come easily. I feel, not good, I said. She misunderstood. She thought I meant physically sick. She started asking about symptoms. I became frustrated. No. I mean inside. Emotion. She looked confused. That moment sounds small. But small misunderstandings repeated many times can slowly erode intimacy. Research in relationship psychology shows that couples rely heavily on emotional vocabulary to maintain connection. When vocabulary shrinks, emotional clarity shrinks too. English was not just a language between us. It was becoming a filter. Sometimes we switched back to our native language during arguments. And suddenly, everything flowed. The emotion. The frustration. The vulnerability. But then guilt appeared. Shouldn't we practice English more? Isn't this why we moved to America? Are we limiting our growth by staying comfortable? So we forced ourselves to continue in English. And forcing anything in a relationship rarely ends well. There is another layer to this. When one partner adapts faster in a new country, a subtle power shift can happen. The partner with stronger English skills handles phone calls, school meetings, official documents. They become the communicator with the outside world. This creates imbalance. She began speaking to teachers at parent conferences. She translated emails for me sometimes. She corrected my pronunciation in public once, without realizing how embarrassed I felt. It was not disrespect. It was efficiency. But my pride reacted anyway. Instead of saying, "I feel insecure," I became quiet. Silence became my protection. One Sunday afternoon, while the kids were playing in their room, we sat at the dining table practicing English reading. We were using a simple story about family life in America. She read a paragraph smoothly. When it was my turn, I stumbled over a word. Comfortable. I said it wrong. She corrected me gently. But I snapped. I know. I just said it wrong. The room became tense. It was not about pronunciation. It was about fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of not being enough. Fear that English fluency might create emotional distance instead of unity. Language experts explain that learning a second language can temporarily reduce emotional nuance. You may express thoughts, but not depth. That gap can feel like disconnection in close relationships. That night, after the children slept, we sat quietly again. I finally said something honest. Sometimes when you speak English so well, I feel small. She looked surprised. I never wanted you to feel that way, she said. Then she added something unexpected. Sometimes when you avoid speaking, I feel alone. That sentence opened something important. We were both struggling. But in different ways. I feared losing status. She feared losing partnership. English was not the enemy. Comparison was. In American culture, independence is praised. Confidence is visible. Strong communication skills are valued. We absorbed that pressure. We believed that improving English meant proving something. But marriage is not a competition. It is cooperation. We had unintentionally turned our English journey into a race. Who improves faster? Who adapts better? Who sounds more American? The truth was simple. We were both scared. Scared that growth might pull us apart. Scared that change might redefine our roles. Scared that staying together might become obligation instead of love. That evening, we made a small decision. At home, we would not correct each other unless asked. English practice would happen at specific times. Connection would happen separately. We separated performance from intimacy. Because when your partner becomes your evaluator, closeness suffers. English returned to being a tool. Not a weapon. Not a measuring stick. Not proof of worth. Just a tool for communication in the United States. And something surprising happened. When pressure decreased, fluency improved. When comparison stopped, conversation deepened. Language is powerful. It can build bridges. Or it can quietly build walls. The difference is not vocabulary. It is intention. And we were finally starting to understand that staying together required more than shared children and shared immigration goals. It required choosing each other beyond language. The distance between us wasn't explosive anymore. Some nights, the silence felt louder than any argument. We stopped slamming doors. We stopped raising our voices. Instead, we started speaking in polite, careful sentences that sounded like customer service scripts. And somehow, that hurt more. Because when passion disappears, even anger feels like a luxury. It was subtle. Quiet. Dangerous. This is where many relationships don't break dramatically, they slowly dissolve. We still slept back to back. But something had shifted. One morning, I woke up before the alarm. The room was dim, the curtains barely letting in light. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time I felt excited to see him. Not comfortable. Not safe. Excited. Nothing came to mind. That realization hit hard. During breakfast, we talked about bills. Groceries. A friend's upcoming wedding. Safe topics. Surface-level conversations. If someone had recorded us, it would have sounded like a healthy, functional couple. But underneath? We were strangers sharing responsibilities. That week, something unexpected happened. My coworker asked if I wanted to grab coffee after work. Nothing romantic. Just casual. I almost said no out of habit, out of loyalty. Then I paused. Why did I feel guilty for wanting simple connection? That question followed me home. Connection. Not attraction. Not temptation. Just connection. At dinner, I tried something small. I feel like we don't really talk anymore, I said. He didn't get defensive. He didn't argue. He just looked tired. I don't know what to say, he replied. And that was honest. Painfully honest. Because sometimes the problem isn't cruelty. It's emotional exhaustion. It's two people who love each other but don't know how to reach each other anymore. That night, instead of turning away immediately, I stayed on my back for a few extra seconds. Waiting. Listening to his breathing. Hoping he would move first. He didn't. So I turned away. Again. In this relationship story for English learners, the vocabulary isn't complicated. But the emotions are. And that's the point. Real life doesn't use dramatic speeches. It uses silence. Days passed. Then came the moment that shifted everything, not dramatically, but quietly. I got sick. Nothing serious. Just a fever and a bad headache. I called in sick and stayed in bed all day. He came home earlier than usual. Without asking, he brought water. Medicine. He checked my temperature. He adjusted the blanket when I shivered. No big declarations. Just care. and something inside me cracked. Because care means there is still something alive. Later that night, I whispered, "Why does it feel easier to take care of me when I'm sick than when I'm just sad?" He froze. That question hung between us. "I don't know how to fix sad," he said quietly. That sentence changed the atmosphere in the room. He wasn't indifferent. He was afraid. Afraid of saying the wrong thing. Afraid of making it worse. Afraid of confronting his own feelings. In many American relationship stories, conflict is loud. But in real life, especially in long-term relationships, it's often quiet fear. For the first time in months, we faced each other in bed. Not touching, but facing. And that mattered. The next day, we didn't magically reconnect. We didn't suddenly become the couple from the beginning of our love story. Growth isn't cinematic. It's awkward. Slow. Uncomfortable. We decided to try something small. 10 minutes. Every night. No phones. No TV. Just 10 minutes of honest conversation. The first night was painful. Silences stretched. Words stumbled. "I miss how we used to laugh," I admitted. "I miss feeling like I wasn't disappointing you," he said. That one surprised me. Because in my mind, I was the one feeling unseen. But he had been carrying his own quiet insecurity. That's the dangerous thing about emotional distance. Both people feel alone at the same time. Over the next few days, our 10 minutes became 15. Sometimes 20. We didn't solve everything. But we started understanding. He explained how pressure at work made him withdraw. I explained how silence felt like rejection to me. He thought giving space was respectful. I thought it was abandonment. Same actions. Different interpretations. That's where many couples get lost. In this spoken English practice through story, you're not just learning vocabulary like withdraw, misunderstanding, or emotional distance. You're learning how context changes meaning. Tone changes meaning. Timing changes meaning. One night, something unexpected happened. As we lay down, he didn't turn away. He stayed still. Waiting. I noticed immediately. My heart started racing over something so small it almost felt ridiculous. Then, slowly, he reached back. Not dramatically. Just his fingers brushing mine. It was hesitant. Almost shy. But real. I intertwined my fingers with his. And for the first time in months, we fell asleep facing the same direction. Not perfectly aligned. Not magically healed. But trying. That's the word that matters. Trying. Relationships don't survive because people never drift apart. They survive because at least one person is brave enough to reach, and the other is brave enough to respond. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Reaching doesn't always work. Sometimes the other person doesn't respond. Sometimes the silence stays silent. So the question becomes bigger than love. It becomes about courage. In the next part of this realistic American English story, something unexpected will test whether effort is enough. Because trying once is easy. Trying consistently? That's where character shows. And sometimes, when you finally turn around, you realize you're not the only one who's been waiting. If this story feels close to home, stay with it. Because what happens next might change the way you see distance, effort, and what it truly means to fight for love. Reaching once felt brave. Reaching again felt vulnerable. Effort stops being emotional and starts becoming intentional. Because anyone can reach out in a soft moment. The real question is, what happens the next time it feels awkward, or rejected? The morning after we intertwined our fingers, nothing dramatic changed. We still had work. Deadlines. Groceries. Traffic. Real life doesn't pause for emotional breakthroughs. But something subtle shifted. He texted me around noon. Did you eat? 3 simple words. Not romantic. Not poetic. But present. And presence had been missing for months. I replied, yes. You? He answered immediately. That alone felt different. He used to take hours. Small shifts. That's how emotional distance closes, inch by inch. That night, during our 10 minutes, he spoke first. I've been thinking, he said. I don't want us to just survive. The word survive hit me. Because that's exactly what we had been doing. Surviving each other. Surviving silence. Surviving routines. I don't either, I admitted. But wanting something and knowing how to create it are two very different things. In many relationship stories for English learners, there's a big romantic gesture at this point. Flowers. A surprise trip. A dramatic apology. We didn't have that. What we had was discomfort. And honesty. I don't know how to be the version of me you fell in love with, he said. That sentence carried more weight than any bouquet ever could. Because it revealed insecurity. I didn't fall in love with a perfect version, I replied. I fell in love with the one who tried. Silence. Then he nodded slowly. Trying. There it was again. The next few days were strange. Better, but fragile. Like walking on ice that hasn't fully frozen. We laughed once over something stupid on TV. The sound startled both of us. It had been so long since we laughed naturally together that it felt unfamiliar. Later that night, he reached for my hand again. This time, I hesitated. And that hesitation surprised me. Because when someone finally reaches back, you expect relief. Instead, I felt fear. What if this is temporary? What if we fall back into silence next week? Rebuilding trust and effort is harder than rebuilding affection. In this spoken English practice through story, notice how emotions shift subtly: doubt, relief, hope, fear. Real conversations are layered. They don't move in straight lines. A few days later, the test came. He had a stressful day at work. I could see it the moment he walked in. Shoulders tight. Jaw clenched. Eyes distant. Old pattern, he withdraws. I feel rejected. We spiral. New pattern? I wasn't sure. I almost stayed quiet. Almost let him retreat. Instead, I said, gently, do you want space, or do you want company? He looked confused at first. Then something softened in his face. Company, he said after a pause. But quiet company. That was new. Before, I would have assumed silence meant disinterest. Now, I understood silence could mean overload. So we sat on the couch. No deep talk. No forced positivity. Just shared presence. And that's when I realized something important. Sometimes emotional intimacy isn't about solving feelings. It's about tolerating them together. Later that week, we missed our 10-minute talk. We were tired. Distracted. A little irritated. The old fear rushed back into my chest. Here we go again. But instead of shutting down, I said, can we not skip 2 days in a row? He didn't argue. He didn't sigh. He simply nodded and turned off his phone. Consistency. Not perfection. That became our new goal. In this realistic American English story, the turning point isn't dramatic. It's repetitive. Choosing each other again. And again. Especially when it's inconvenient. Then came the conversation we had been avoiding. Are we staying together because we're afraid to be alone? I asked one night. The room felt heavier immediately. He didn't answer right away. I was afraid of that, he admitted. But lately, I'm choosing this. Choosing. Not defaulting. Not settling. Choosing. And that difference matters. Because staying out of fear creates resentment. Staying out of choice creates effort. Still, healing isn't linear. One evening, we argued. Not explosively. But sharply. He forgot something important to me. I overreacted. Old wounds resurfaced. For a moment, it felt like we were back at the beginning, backs turned, walls rising. This time, though, something changed. He turned around first. Not hours later. Not the next morning. Immediately. I don't want to go back to that version of us, he said quietly. That sentence broke the tension faster than any apology. Because it showed awareness. Awareness is growth. We talked. Messily. Imperfectly. But we talked. And when we finally lay down, neither of us turned away. We stayed facing each other. Not touching at first. Just present. Then he said something that caught me off guard. I was waiting for you to give up. The honesty stunned me. Why? Because I thought you deserved better than someone who shuts down. That's the thing about emotional distance. Sometimes the person withdrawing isn't indifferent. They're ashamed. Ashamed they can't show up the way they think they should. In this English listening practice story, you're not just hearing about love. You're hearing about insecurity, pride, vulnerability, the real forces behind relationship conflict. I didn't want perfect, I told him. I wanted real. And for the first time in months, real felt possible. But here's the truth. Effort doesn't erase history overnight. Trust rebuilds slowly. And sometimes, even when both people are trying, something unexpected tests everything. At the end of this week, an opportunity will appear, one that forces us to decide whether growth is enough, or whether some distances leave permanent marks. Because trying together is powerful. But what happens when life pulls in opposite directions? The opportunity didn't look dramatic at first. It arrived as an email. Subject line, "We're impressed." Growth meets reality. Because rebuilding connection inside a relationship is one thing. Testing it against the outside world? That's different. I had applied for a position months ago, back when we were barely speaking. A company in another city. Bigger role. Better pay. A fresh start I secretly imagined during our quietest nights. I never thought they would respond. But they did. And they wanted an interview. My heart pounded as I read the message again and again. Excitement. Fear. Guilt. That last one surprised me. Why did success suddenly feel like betrayal? When he came home that evening, I almost didn't mention it. Old habits still lingered: minimize, avoid, delay. But we had promised honesty. So during our 10 minutes, I told him. I got an interview. It's in Chicago. The word hung in the air between us. Chicago. He blinked. Just once. That's amazing, he said. And he meant it. I could see pride in his eyes. But beneath it? Something heavier. When? He asked. Next week. Silence. Not the cold silence from before. This one felt like calculation. Logistics. Possibilities. Consequences. You should go, he said finally. Simple. Supportive. But nothing about this felt simple. In many relationship stories for English learners, this is where one partner dramatically says, "I'll move with you," or "Love matters more than career." Real life rarely works like that. His job was stable. Rooted. Promotion on the horizon. His family lived nearby. Our apartment lease wasn't up for months. And we had just started rebuilding. That night, we didn't turn away. But we didn't reach either. We lay there staring at the ceiling, both pretending not to think too loudly. The interview went well. Too well. They offered me the job within 3 days. Higher salary. Leadership role. Growth I had wanted for years. Start date, 6 weeks. The excitement was undeniable. So was the pressure. When I told him, he hugged me immediately. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. And I believed him. But pride doesn't erase reality. Later that night, I asked the question neither of us wanted to say out loud. What happens to us? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked, what do you want? That question hit differently now. Months ago, I would have said, I want us to feel okay again. Now? I want both, I admitted. I want this job. And I want us. He exhaled slowly. Sometimes both isn't possible in the same way. That wasn't negativity. It was honesty. In this spoken English practice through story, notice how conflict isn't about villains. It's about values. Timing. Identity. For the next few days, tension returned, but not in the old silent way. This time, it was thoughtful. Measured. We talked logistics. Long distance. Temporary relocation. Him searching for jobs there. Every option felt heavy. One evening, he surprised me. I looked at apartments in Chicago, he said casually. My heart skipped. Chicago had shifted from abstract opportunity to potential reality. You did? Just to see, he shrugged. No promises. Hope flickered. But hope is fragile when built on uncertainty. The real test came during dinner with his family. His mother asked about my job search, unaware of the offer. He looked at me. I looked at him. And in that split second, we had to choose transparency or avoidance. I got an offer in Chicago, I said. The table went quiet. Concern. Surprise. Questions. Would you move? Someone asked him directly. All eyes on him. He didn't hesitate. If that's what we decide together. Together. That word steadied me more than any reassurance. Later that night, though, he was quieter than usual. What's going on? I asked. I'm scared, he admitted. Not angry. Not resistant. Scared. Of what? That I'll follow you and lose myself. Or that I won't follow you and lose you. There it was. The impossible math of adult relationships. Sacrifice isn't romantic when it threatens identity. In many realistic American English stories, love is tested by distance. But the deeper test is autonomy. Can two people grow without shrinking each other? We sat on the floor of our living room, backs against the couch. I don't want you to give up your life for me, I said. I don't want you to shrink your dreams for me, he replied. Both statements true. Both incomplete. Because compromise isn't about grand gestures. It's about aligned risk. Days passed. The offer deadline approached. Pressure built. One night, I asked the hardest question yet. If we were perfectly stable right now, would this still scare you? He thought about it. Yes, he said honestly. But less. That answer mattered. Because it meant the fear wasn't about us failing again. It was about change. Change exposes cracks. but it also reveals strength. In this English listening practice story, tension doesn't explode. It simmers. Decisions grow heavier the closer they become real. 3 days before my deadline, he did something unexpected. He applied for jobs in Chicago. Not dramatically announced. Just quietly done. "I don't know if it'll work," he said. "But I'd rather try than resent you later." That sentence shifted everything. Not because it guaranteed a move, but because it showed willingness. Willingness to risk discomfort. Willingness to evolve. The night before my response was due, we lay facing each other again. "Are we strong enough for this?" I whispered. He didn't say yes immediately. Instead, he asked, "Are we willing enough?" Willing. There's that word again. Love isn't proven in comfort. It's proven in uncertainty. I accepted the offer. 6 weeks suddenly felt short. Boxes would need packing. Plans would need making. But one thing remained unresolved. His job applications hadn't received responses yet. We didn't know if he would have something lined up. We didn't know if we'd start long distance. We didn't know if effort would survive miles. All we knew was this. We were choosing the unknown together. And sometimes, that's the bravest decision of all. 6 weeks disappear faster than you think. Distance stops being an idea and becomes geography. Suitcases. Goodbyes. Airplanes. And the quiet fear that effort might not stretch as far as love hopes it will. The apartment slowly transformed into stacks of boxes. Our bookshelf looked hollow. The walls felt less like home and more like temporary shelter. We moved carefully around each other, trying not to bump into unspoken worries. His job applications were still pending. No offers yet. "We'll figure it out," he kept saying. And I wanted to believe that confidence was solid, not fragile. The morning of my flight felt surreal. Coffee tasted different. The air felt heavier. Every small routine, brushing my teeth, tying my shoes, felt like it carried extra meaning. At the airport, neither of us cried immediately. We stood there longer than necessary. "This isn't goodbye," he said. "I know. But departures don't care about technical definitions." When they called my boarding group, he pulled me into a tight hug. "Don't disappear on me," he whispered. "I won't." "Don't retreat on me." He nodded. That was our real promise. Not eternal love. Not dramatic forever vows. Just, stay engaged. The first night in my new apartment in Chicago felt too quiet. Different city sounds. Different air. No familiar breathing beside me. I placed my phone on the pillow next to me, absurdly, as if proximity could substitute presence. We video called that night. "How's it feel?" he asked. "Big," I said. "Exciting." "Lonely." He smiled gently. "You can be all three." That mattered. Permission to feel complex emotions without guilt. In many long-distance relationship stories, the beginning is romantic. Late-night calls, sweet messages, dramatic declarations of missing each other. We had that too. For a while. We texted constantly the first week. Sent photos of meals. Screenshots of funny conversations. Updates about job interviews he was scheduling. But then reality returned. My new job demanded more than I expected. Longer hours. New responsibilities. Proving myself all over again. His days stayed the same office, same commute, same friends. And slowly, time zones and schedules started creating gaps. Nothing dramatic. Just delayed replies. Missed calls. Sorry, I fell asleep. Sorry, I had an early meeting. Tiny fractures. In this spoken English practice through story, notice how conflict grows quietly again, not through betrayal, but through exhaustion. One night, after a particularly hard day, I called him expecting comfort. Instead, he sounded distracted. "Can I call you back?" he asked. "I'm in the middle of something." My chest tightened. Old fear resurfaced instantly. Here we go again. The voice inside me whispered, "Distance makes it easier to detach." When he called back an hour later, I answered coolly. "You seem different," he said carefully. "I'm just tired." That wasn't the full truth. The full truth was this. I was afraid effort had an expiration date. We argued that night. Not explosively, but sharply. "I can't read your mind through a screen," he said. "I can't feel supported through silence," I shot back. Silence followed. Not the old silent withdrawal. This one was heavier because miles amplified it. After we hung up, I stared at the ceiling of my unfamiliar bedroom and wondered if growth had geographical limits. The next day, something unexpected happened. He sent me a screenshot. A job offer. In Chicago. Not final yet, pending details, but real. My heart raced. Chicago no longer felt like a dividing line. It felt like possibility. "I didn't want to tell you until it was real," he said during our call. "I didn't want to disappoint you." There it was again. That quiet shame he carried. "You don't disappoint me by trying," I said. He exhaled slowly. "I was scared you'd outgrow me here." That confession stopped me. Outgrow. Distance doesn't just test love. It tests insecurity. In many realistic American relationship stories, one partner fears being left behind, emotionally, financially, socially. "I don't want a life that doesn't include you," I said honestly. "But I also don't want a life built on shrinking." "Then don't shrink," he replied. "Just don't forget to reach." That line stayed with me. The next few weeks were chaotic. Paperwork. Negotiations. Logistics. His offer became official. Start date, 1 month after mine. We would still have weeks apart. But there was an end in sight. Strangely, knowing distance had a timeline made it harder. The final weeks felt suspended, like we were in two separate realities preparing to merge. One evening, after another long day, I almost didn't call. I was exhausted. Overwhelmed. Then I remembered the airport promise. Stay engaged. So I called. I don't have energy for deep talk tonight, I admitted immediately. Me neither, he said. So we sat on video quietly. Not speaking much. Just existing in parallel. And somehow, that felt more intimate than forced conversation. Sometimes long distance doesn't need grand gestures. It needs consistency. The night before he packed his own suitcase, he said something that caught me off guard. I'm not moving just for you, he said gently. I'm moving because I want the version of us that grows. That distinction mattered. Sacrifice built on obligation breeds resentment. Sacrifice built on shared vision builds strength. Still, uncertainty lingered. Would living together again feel natural? Would the independence we developed clash? Would we drift in new ways? Because growth changes people. And two people growing separately don't always evolve in the same direction. Reunions look romantic in movies. Airports. Running. Tight hugs. Spinning in circles like distance never happened. Real life is quieter. The distance closes, but a new question opens. When two people grow separately, what happens when they finally stand in the same room again? I waited outside my apartment building in Chicago, heart racing harder than I expected. Not because I doubted him. Because I wasn't sure who we were now. His car pulled up. He stepped out. Same face. Same smile. Different energy. More confident. More grounded. He looked at me like he was measuring something invisible. Then he walked toward me. No dramatic sprint. No cinematic music. Just steady steps. When he hugged me, it felt familiar, and slightly unfamiliar at the same time. Like muscle memory adjusting to a new rhythm. You look different, he said softly. Better or worse? Stronger. That word stayed with me. Inside the apartment, his suitcase sat by the door. It suddenly looked too small for everything this move represented. We ordered takeout and sat on the floor, plates balanced on our knees like the first week I moved here. It felt symbolic. A reset. But comfort doesn't automatically return just because proximity does. That first night sleeping in the same bed again felt strangely formal. We faced each other, careful, almost polite. Distance had built independence. Independence builds confidence. Confidence changes dynamics. In many long-distance relationship stories, reunion erases tension instantly. Ours didn't. There was love. There was attraction. But there was also adjustment. The next morning, I left early for work. He stayed behind, starting his new remote onboarding. When I came home, I found him rearranging the kitchen. Not drastically. Just small shifts. Coffee mugs in a different cabinet. Spices reorganized. Something inside me reacted instantly. Why did that bother me? Because this had been my space. My system. My rhythm. Now it was becoming ours again. Growth brings subtle territorial instincts. Is this okay? He asked, noticing my hesitation. Yes, I said quickly. But later that night, during our now famous 10 minutes, I admitted it. I think I'm struggling with sharing this space again. He didn't get defensive. I'm struggling with feeling like a guest, he replied. There it was. Same apartment. Different insecurities. In this spoken English practice through story, pay attention to how conflict evolves. It's no longer about silence. It's about identity. Over the next few days, little tensions surfaced. I worked late one evening without warning him. He had cooked dinner. I thought we were past not communicating, he said quietly. The old guilt flared. I wasn't avoiding you, I replied. I was building something. That sentence revealed more than I intended. Building something. Career. Confidence. Independence. Distance had forced us to grow individually. Now we had to integrate those versions. Integration is harder than reconnection. One weekend, we walked along the lakefront in Chicago. The wind was sharp, the skyline steady behind us. He reached for my hand. I held it, but this time not out of fear of losing him. Out of choice. Do you think we changed too much? He asked. I thought carefully. I think we changed enough to see each other clearly. Clarity isn't always comforting. Sometimes it reveals misalignment. But sometimes it reveals strength. Later that night, something unexpected happened. We argued, but differently. No withdrawal. No cold shoulders. Just direct honesty. I don't want to feel like I moved here just to fit into your life, he said. And I don't want to shrink what I built here to make you comfortable, I replied. Both statements true. Both vulnerable. The difference now? We stayed in the conversation. No turning away. No emotional retreat. That's growth. In many realistic American relationship stories, the reunion phase exposes whether effort was temporary or transformational. We were discovering the answer in real time. A week later, he invited me to meet some of his new coworkers. Watching him in that space, confident, capable, adapting, filled me with unexpected pride. He wasn't following me. He was building his own version of this city. And that shifted something fundamental inside me. We weren't merging into one identity. We were aligning two independent ones. Alignment requires respect. Respect requires awareness. That night, back in our apartment, he said something that felt like closure and beginning at the same time. I don't want us to go back to who we were before the distance. Me neither, I agreed. Because before the distance, we survived. During the distance, we chose. After the distance, we evolved. Still, one final test remained, subtle but powerful. Comfort. Comfort can quietly replace effort. A few weeks into living together again, routine settled. Work. Dinner. Sleep. And one night, as we lay down, I noticed something. He turned slightly away. Not fully. But enough to trigger memory. My heart paused. Was this the beginning of old patterns? Or just a comfortable position? This time, instead of spiraling silently, I touched his shoulder. "Stay facing me," I whispered lightly. He turned immediately, smiling. "Still here," he said. That small exchange meant more than dramatic speeches ever could. Because now, turning toward each other was intentional. Nothing was wrong. That was the problem. There are no dramatic job offers, no airports, no emotional confessions shaking the room. Just routine. Stability. Predictability. And the quiet question that sneaks in when life becomes steady. Are we still choosing each other, or just continuing? Weeks passed in Chicago without conflict. Work felt manageable. Our schedules aligned. Groceries were bought on time. Laundry folded. Dishes cleaned. Functional. Healthy. Normal. But normal has a shadow side. One Tuesday night, I noticed we had both been on our phones for almost an hour without speaking. Not ignoring each other. Not upset. Just occupied. He laughed at something on his screen. I smiled automatically without asking what it was. And that's when I felt it, a tiny flicker of distance. Not emotional withdrawal. Not pain. Just disconnection through distraction. In many realistic American relationship stories, crises pull people apart. But comfort can slowly loosen the threads too. Later that night, during our now shorter 10 minutes, which had quietly shrunk to 5, I asked, "Do you think we're coasting?" He looked up immediately. Coasting? Like, not in danger. But not intentional either. He leaned back, thinking. "I think we're tired," he said carefully. "And being okay feels safe." Safe. Safe used to be all I wanted. Now, I wasn't sure if safe alone was enough. In this spoken English practice through story, notice how emotional nuance replaces dramatic conflict. Vocabulary like intentional, coasting, safe, complacent, these words define mature relationship tension. The next few days, I paid closer attention. We weren't unhappy. But we weren't stretching either. No deep conversations. No curiosity. No risk. Just smooth routine. One evening, while walking home together under the city lights of Chicago, I decided to push gently. "What scares you right now?" I asked. He blinked, surprised. "About us?" "About anything." He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm scared of becoming predictable," he admitted. That wasn't the answer I expected. Predictable how? Like we worked so hard to fix things, and now we just settle into something comfortable and stop growing. The honesty startled me, because it mirrored my own quiet fear. Growth saved us. Would comfort weaken us? In many long-term relationship stories, the biggest shift isn't from love to hate. It's from effort to autopilot. That night, instead of watching TV, we sat at the kitchen table and asked each other questions. Not logistical ones. Real ones. What do you want in the next year? What part of yourself feels underused? What do you miss about who we were? The answers weren't dramatic, but they were revealing. He missed spontaneity. I missed playful teasing. We both missed curiosity. Distance had forced intentional connection. Proximity had allowed laziness. The next weekend, he surprised me. "Get dressed," he said casually. No questions. I raised an eyebrow but played along. He drove without explaining, city lights blurring past the windows of Chicago. We ended up at a small live music bar neither of us had been to before. "You said you missed spontaneity," he shrugged. Something inside me warmed. Not because it was extravagant. Because it was deliberate. Effort in stability feels different than effort in crisis. It's less urgent. More chosen. That night, as music filled the room, we laughed, not politely, not carefully. Genuinely. On the drive home, I realized something subtle but important. Connection doesn't maintain itself just because problems disappear. It requires maintenance without emergency. The following week, I initiated something. "Let's restart the 10 minutes, I suggested. But make them uncomfortable again." He smiled. Uncomfortable how? Questions we'd normally avoid. So we did. "Do you ever imagine a life without me?" "Yes," he answered honestly. "Not because I want it, but because I want to know I'm choosing you freely." That answer could have hurt. Instead, it felt mature. Choice matters more when it's conscious. In this English listening practice story, you're hearing how adult relationships survive not through fantasy, but through awareness. A few nights later, I caught myself turning slightly away in bed. Old habit. Comfortable position. But before distance could even form, he gently tapped my shoulder. "Stay facing me." I smiled in the dark. We had learned the pattern. More importantly, we interrupted it early. Routine doesn't destroy love. Unnoticed routine does. One evening, after a long day, I almost skipped our conversation time. "I'm exhausted," I muttered. "Me too," he said. We stared at each other for a second. Then he asked, 2 minutes. Not 10. Not deep. Just 2. We lay there and shared one honest thought each. That tiny commitment mattered more than grand gestures. Because it said, even when nothing is wrong, we still choose engagement. Still, a new layer of fear surfaced quietly inside me. What happens when life throws something harder than distance or routine? What happens when values shift? Because growth doesn't stop just because a relationship stabilizes. Careers evolve. Dreams change. Priorities realign. And sometimes, two people grow in directions that aren't obviously conflicting, but aren't identical either. The question didn't arrive during an argument. It showed up on a quiet Sunday morning. It's about direction. Because loving each other in the present is powerful, but agreeing on the future? That's where alignment becomes real. We were sitting at a small cafe in Chicago, sunlight spilling across the table, when he said it casually. Where do you see us in 5 years? Simple question. Heavy impact. 5 years used to feel abstract. Now it felt strategic. I took a sip of coffee, buying time. I see growth, I said slowly. Career progress. Maybe a bigger place. Stability. He nodded. I see movement, he replied. Maybe not staying in one city forever. Trying different places. Different experiences. Movement. Stability. Not opposites, but not identical either. In many realistic American relationship stories, the biggest conflicts aren't emotional. They're practical. Vision-based. Value-driven. Do you want to leave Chicago eventually? I asked. He shrugged lightly. Maybe. I don't want to feel locked in. Locked in. That phrase lingered. I had fought hard to build my role here. My confidence had grown in this city. My independence solidified. I don't want to feel uprooted constantly, I admitted. There it was. Not a fight. A fork in perspective. In this spoken English practice through story, notice how disagreement doesn't mean incompatibility, but it does require clarity. We didn't argue that morning. We just acknowledged the difference. Later that week, the conversation resurfaced during our evening walk along the lake in Chicago. I've been thinking, he said. When I talk about movement, I don't mean running away. I mean expanding. Expanding what? I asked. Experience. Identity. I don't want comfort to define us. The irony wasn't lost on me. Months ago, comfort felt like survival. Now comfort felt like limitation, to him. To me, comfort felt earned. We sat on a bench, wind cutting through the skyline. What if expanding means different things to us? I asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked, what scares you more, staying or changing? I surprised myself with my response. Changing alone. Silence. Not tense. Reflective. I'm not asking you to change alone, he said softly. But are you asking me to follow? I countered. There it was again. Follow. Lead. Stay. Go. Relationships aren't negotiations of love, they're negotiations of trajectory. In many long-term relationship stories, couples drift not because they stop caring, but because their futures stop overlapping. That night, during our 10 intentional minutes, we did something different. We wrote separately. 5 years from now. No discussion. Just honest vision. When we exchanged pages, my chest tightened. His included travel. Maybe another city. Possibly even a different country for a year. Mine included leadership growth in my field. Community. Roots. Neither excluded the other. But neither fully centered the other either. And that was honest. I don't want to shrink your ambition, he said. I don't want to anchor your curiosity, I replied. For a moment, it felt like we were standing at the beginning of distance again, not geographical this time, but philosophical. In this English listening practice story, the tension becomes subtle and mature. No betrayal. No dramatic flaw. Just two evolving humans trying to synchronize timelines. A few days later, he got an invitation to apply for an internal role, one that would require relocation in 2 years. He showed me the email. Just an option, he said carefully. Option. That word can feel empowering or threatening, depending on timing. How serious are you? I asked. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I want the freedom to explore it. Freedom. Security. 2 core needs. Neither wrong. One night, as we lay in bed facing each other, a habit we now protected deliberately, I asked the question that had been building quietly. If our visions don't align perfectly, is love enough? He didn't rush to reassure me. And I appreciated that. Love isn't a location, he said thoughtfully. It's a willingness. Willingness again. The word that had carried us through distance. But willingness requires flexibility. Flexibility has limits. I don't want us to wake up resentful in 3 years, I admitted. Then we don't ignore this now, he said firmly. That firmness felt grounding. We weren't avoiding. We were confronting early. The next weekend, instead of another spontaneous date, we scheduled something intentional. A future mapping session. Not romantic. But necessary. We listed non-negotiables. Mine, meaningful career growth, stability in at least one place for a significant period. His, exploration, new environments at least once more, avoiding stagnation. Overlap. Growth. Shared experience. Intentional partnership. The realization was subtle but powerful. Our difference wasn't about values. It was about pacing. He wanted expansion sooner. I wanted consolidation first. Compromise wouldn't mean one surrendering identity. It would mean sequencing dreams strategically. In many modern American relationship stories, success depends less on passion and more on adaptability. We didn't solve everything that night. But we reframed the fear. It wasn't, are we compatible? It was, can we design a path that respects both evolutions? As we closed our notebooks, he looked at me differently. Not romantically. Respectfully. I don't want to drag you somewhere you're not ready to go, he said. And I don't want to hold you somewhere you feel stuck, I replied. That mutual acknowledgement felt deeper than any airport reunion. Still, clarity doesn't eliminate risk. Two people can understand each other completely and still choose different roads. Acceleration rarely asks for permission. The future we carefully mapped out gets pushed forward faster than either of us expected. Because sometimes life doesn't wait for perfect alignment, it tests willingness in real time. It started with a phone call. He stepped into the hallway to take it. I didn't think much of it at first. Work calls had become normal. Ambition had become familiar. But when he walked back in, his expression was different. Focused. Alert. Almost electric. That internal role, he said slowly. They want to fast-track interviews. The relocation wouldn't be in 2 years. It could be next year. Next year. 12 months. Not distant. Not abstract. Immediate. And the location? I asked carefully. He hesitated. Seattle. Seattle. The word felt heavier than I expected. Seattle meant rain, tech hubs, mountains, and 2,000 miles from the version of stability I had built in Chicago. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. How do you feel? He didn't smile. I feel excited, he admitted. And terrified. Terrified of what? Of losing momentum here. Or losing us. There it was again, the dual fear. Career versus connection. In many modern American relationship stories, couples talk about dreams in theory. But when theory turns into deadlines, pressure exposes truth. We didn't argue that night. We sat at the kitchen table, notebooks open again. What does this mean for your timeline? I asked. He looked at me directly. It means expansion sooner than planned. And what does that mean for me? He didn't answer immediately. Honesty requires courage. It means we either redefine stability, or we risk resenting each other. Resentment. That word felt more dangerous than distance ever did. In this spoken English practice through story, notice how mature conflict centers around long-term consequence, not immediate emotion. For days, we moved through routines with a quiet layer of tension beneath everything. He researched housing costs in Seattle. I found myself lingering longer at work in Chicago, looking at my office differently. Investment creates attachment. Attachment resists relocation. One evening, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. If you don't apply, will you regret it? He didn't hesitate. Yes. That honesty stung, but it clarified everything. And if you apply and get it? I continued. I'll want to go. No manipulation. No softening. Just truth. The clarity hurt more than uncertainty. In many long-term relationship stories, love fails not because of betrayal, but because of divergent ambition. I went for a walk alone that night along the lakefront in Chicago. The skyline glowed, steady and familiar. This city represented my growth. My independence. The version of me who didn't shrink. Was I willing to uproot that again? Or was I protecting comfort under the name of identity? The real question wasn't about Seattle. It was about fear. The next night, during our intentional conversation time, I said something that surprised even me. I don't want to be the reason you don't try. He exhaled slowly. I don't want you to feel like you're sacrificing everything again. Again. Distance had already required sacrifice. Was I ready for another round? In this English listening practice story, the tension deepens without shouting. Adult decisions rarely explode, they weigh. A week later, he received the official interview schedule. 3 rounds. Final decision within a month. Time compressed. We agreed on something important, no avoidance. Every step would be discussed openly. After his first interview, he looked energized. They're serious, he said. I smiled, genuinely proud. But later that night, lying in bed facing each other, a habit we had fought to build, I whispered, I'm scared. Of losing me? He asked gently. No. Of losing myself. That landed differently. He reached for my hand. Then we don't repeat the past, he said firmly. We design it better. Design. Intentionality again. The difference now? We weren't rebuilding from silence. We were negotiating from awareness. Still, clarity doesn't eliminate tension. During his final interview week, my own manager hinted at a major promotion opportunity, tied specifically to staying in Chicago for at least 2 more years. 2 years. The exact timeline that would conflict with Seattle. Life has a sharp sense of irony. When I told him, he didn't hide the complexity. That's huge, he said. It is. We sat there, both holding opportunities that pulled in opposite directions. Neither of us wrong. Neither of us selfish. Just ambitious. In many realistic American relationship stories, love survives because one person compromises fully. But full compromise often breeds quiet regret. We refuse to default to that model. If we both get what we want, he said slowly, it might not be in the same city. There it was. Long distance again? Temporary separation? Or one delayed dream? No easy answer. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the window of our Chicago apartment, he asked softly. If choosing each other means adjusting timelines, how much adjustment is fair? Fairness in relationships isn't mathematical. It's emotional. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed. Email notification. Subject line, final decision. Everything paused. This was the moment theory ended. The email was open. Neither of us breathed. It's about identity, partnership, and what love actually requires when ambition is real. He read silently first. His jaw tightened. Then softened. Well? I whispered. I got it. 2 simple words. The room shifted. Not dramatically, but permanently. Seattle was no longer hypothetical. It was real. Start date, 6 months. 6 months to decide whether we were relocating, restructuring, or redefining. I felt pride immediately. Genuine pride. He had worked hard for this. Then, almost simultaneously, I felt grief. Grief for the version of stability I had just begun to enjoy in Chicago. He looked at me carefully, searching for my reaction. "You don't have to respond right now," he said. But silence had almost destroyed us once before. So I chose honesty. "I'm proud of you," I said first. "And I'm scared." He nodded slowly. "Me too." That mutual fear felt stabilizing in a strange way. Not one of us dragging the other. Both of us aware. In many modern American relationship stories, this is the fork where one person sacrifices fully. But real partnership is rarely that simple. That evening, we took a long walk along the lake in Chicago. The skyline glowed behind us, the city that had rebuilt us after distance and doubt. "I don't want you to give this up," I said quietly. "I don't want you to give up your promotion path," he replied. We stopped walking. For the first time in months, the future felt heavier than the past. "What if we try long distance again?" he asked. The idea didn't feel romantic this time. It felt strategic. Temporary separation. 6 months apart while I completed a major project cycle in Chicago. Then reevaluate. Different from before. Not drifting apart emotionally. Not rebuilding from silence. But choosing structure intentionally. In this spoken English practice through story, notice how mature relationships often rely on planning rather than passion. "Would distance change us again?" I asked. "Yes," he said honestly. "But change doesn't automatically mean damage." That was growth speaking. Distance had once revealed cracks. Later, it had revealed strength. Now it would test design. Over the next few days, we mapped scenarios. Option 1, I decline promotion momentum and move immediately. Option 2, he delays Seattle, unlikely and potentially harmful to his trajectory. Option 3, structured long distance with fixed checkpoints. The third felt hardest emotionally. But fairest practically. "I don't want either of us waking up resentful in 5 years, he said one night, lying across from me, still facing each other, still intentional. "Then we don't pretend sacrifice is romantic," I replied. We agreed on something critical. No silent suffering. If distance started eroding connection, we would address it early. No repeating old patterns. The week before he left, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling fragile, we felt focused. We planned visits. Calendar blocks. Financial goals. Even personal growth milestones we track individually. Ambition wasn't the enemy anymore. Neglect was. The night before his flight to Seattle, we sat on the living room floor, just like the night he first arrived in Chicago. Full circle. "Are we doing the right thing?" I asked softly. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we're doing it consciously." That mattered. Love without awareness drifts. Love with awareness adapts. The airport goodbye felt different this time. Less desperation. More determination. "This isn't survival," he said, pulling me into a tight hug. "It's strategy." I smiled through the ache. "Stay facing me," I whispered. "Always." When I returned to our apartment in Chicago that night, the silence felt familiar, but not threatening. Because this time, distance wasn't avoidance. It was agreement. Weeks passed. We scheduled video calls intentionally, not out of panic, but maintenance. We shared career wins without minimizing them. We discussed loneliness without dramatizing it. There were hard days. Days I questioned whether two ambitious people could truly synchronize long-term. Days he wondered if Seattle would reshape him in ways that made alignment harder. But something fundamental had shifted. We were no longer afraid of the conversation. And that changes everything. 3 months into the arrangement, during one of our calls, he said something that stopped me. "I don't feel like I'm choosing between you and my future anymore," he said. "I feel like I'm building both, just not in the same place right now." That reframing felt powerful. Because sometimes partnership isn't about standing side by side physically. It's about moving in parallel intentionally. As my promotion discussions in Chicago advanced, clarity began forming slowly inside me. I wasn't staying out of fear. I was staying because this chapter still mattered. And when this chapter closed, I would choose again. Not default. Not follow. Choose. In many realistic American relationship stories, the ending is either dramatic reunion or quiet breakup. Ours wasn't either. It was ongoing. 6 months later, as his relocation stabilized and my major project concluded, we sat on another video call, calendars open, future map between us again. No panic. No resentment. Just two people asking the same question we'd been refining for months. Are we still choosing this? And the answer, steady, deliberate, mutual, was yes. Not because it was easy. Not because ambition disappeared. But because willingness remained. Love, we learned, isn't proven when nothing challenges it. It's proven when two people evolve, and keep turning toward each other anyway. And sometimes the strongest relationships aren't the ones that avoid change. They're the ones that survive it, redesign around it, and keep choosing growth, together, even when apart. What if love isn't about finding the right person, but about becoming the right version of yourself, again and again, beside someone who's also evolving? This story was never just about sleeping back to back. It was about silence. About distance. About ambition. About fear. About two people who almost drifted apart, not because they stopped loving each other, but because they stopped turning toward each other. In this real English story practice, you didn't just follow a relationship. You experienced emotional growth through realistic American English conversation, natural dialogue, and authentic life decisions. You listened to conflict without villains. You heard vulnerability without drama. You watched effort replace ego. And here's the deeper truth. Relationships don't collapse in one loud moment. They fade in small, unnoticed ones. A turned back. A missed question. An avoided conversation. A dream never discussed. But they also rebuild in small, intentional choices. A hand reaching first. A difficult truth spoken early. A plan made instead of an assumption. A fear admitted instead of hidden. So now the real question isn't about them. It's about you. When life stretches you. When ambition pulls you. When comfort tempts you to coast. Will you turn away? Or will you turn toward? Because love doesn't survive on feelings alone. It survives on awareness. On design. On willingness. And here's the twist no one talks about. The story doesn't end when the crisis is over. It begins when stability returns. In the next series on this channel, we're going even deeper into modern relationship psychology, spoken English storytelling, and powerful English listening practice through emotional narratives that reflect real life in the United States in 2026 and beyond. You'll hear stories about when success creates imbalance. When independence feels threatening. When silence hides resentment. When growth forces difficult choices. When love isn't enough, unless both people evolve. If this story resonated with you, not just as entertainment, but as reflection, don't let it end here. Subscribe now for more real-life English story practice designed to improve your fluency, emotional vocabulary, and listening skills naturally. Like this video if you believe relationships require effort. Comment below, what part of the story felt closest to your reality? Share this with someone who needs to hear that distance doesn't always mean the end, sometimes it means redesign. And most importantly, stay curious about your own patterns. Stay honest about your fears. Stay brave enough to reach first. Because the next story might not just change your English. It might change the way you love. And trust me, the next episode begins with a decision that makes this one look simple. Don't miss it.